In today's episode, we are joined by an individual who is now currently working at a startup in Munich. He first graduated as an electrical and electronic engineer and is currently doing his master's in power engineering. He's also working on various projects, which he's going to be sharing with us during the podcast.
And that person is a very close friend of ours, Zaid. He was so kind enough to accept our invitation and to be the first guest of our podcast, even though he didn't know how good we were in the podcast. So, welcome, Zaid. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you guys doing right now?
Yeah, we are doing great. We are on a summer break. I'm at least on my summer break now. And Abdul?
Yeah, not on a summer break. You know how it is in in TUM. Uh, I'm actually doing my master's right now, my master's thesis right now, and yeah, it has not been a holiday for me.
Mhm. So, Zaid, tell us in short about you, like who is Zaid and what has he been doing and what did he do before, and like a short introduction about you.
So my name is Zaid Al Shattle, and I've graduated from Dubai in here at University in Electrical and Electronics Engineering. I have then decided to study outside, mostly due like almost a random occurrence. Like it's just like I'm just walking and you know what? We should study outside. And that was when I talked with both Abdu and Fardan at that time, and another friend of ours. And here we are. Right now, I'm both studying in tune for power engineering. I'm also working as a part-time as an engineer. And that's a quick summary of my last 3 years, you can say.
That's good. And tell us about the countries you have lived and some short experience from these countries.
So I've spent most of my life in UAE, around Dubai. So Dubai was an interesting country. It has like a very diverse culture, and I have learned much there. Then after I lived 20 years there or so, like I cannot really judge a place much because that's where I lived, so I didn't have a baseline to judge against. Now I moved in the last 2 years to Germany. Living in Germany has been a very enlightening experience in sorts. It is quite different, both the lifestyle, both everything the people have in here. It's a nice country for sure. I've spent a few months in Jordan, my home country, and it's also nice, but I haven't spent enough time to really judge how living there is. It's more of a visit, you can say.
That's really nice. Would you talk to us more about your experience during like school, like primary school till high school, for example, that transition? How was that for you?
So I've spent in from like you can say from the beginning until high school, I've spent most of it in one school, and then I just moved for high school. In general, for us, like high school wasn't very different. Like, yeah, it was a bit more difficult, you can say. It was a bit more of pressure because for us, we have that culture of having high school as a very, very important aspect that we need to always work on and get like maximized. But until I honestly started university, school itself just felt like school. That's the best description of it. It really like it barely mattered. Yes, it did matter that you got a high, then like a high percentage in order to get into a good university. But the more, even now, the more like time that goes, the more I understand that school in the end was just school. Like it mattered, but only so much to really understand.
did you have any problems living in a country that was not your home country during your high school? Like
I
culture
wouldn't
wise?
I wouldn't say that I had direct issues, you can say. So there wasn't really something that I can call a problem directly, but there were some inconveniences, right? Because in the end, even after being taught everything, you're still like, you figure out at the end of the day, it's still not your country. Despite being taught everything, despite being like taught about the leaders, about how great the country is, and you wish to be part of it, but in the end, you discover that you're just an onlooker. You're just looking from outside. So that feeling was a little bit annoying at times. I wouldn't call it a problem though, because in the end, I did get my education, I did get everything sorted out. I lived there for 20 years, but it still had that issue. Unlike, say, one thing that I like about Germany is that I have that possibility. If you get me, I have the possibility to be part of this image that I'm looking at.
So, like,
yeah.
like the what you experience here that's different from like UAE is that like you are finding yourself. Is that right? Or
You can say not finding myself, because that is part of what's happening, because it's almost because I'm also living on my own and discovering a new place. So that is for sure like helping me build up and discovering myself. But in Germany, I just feel more, you can say, appreciation for what I am and what I can do. So that is what I'm finding most in Germany, and that is one thing I really appreciate in here.
I think it's the same thing with all three of us. I think we have spent most of our time in the Gulf, so it's the same thing with me also. Like, even when you go back to your home country, you feel that you don't fit there, and once you're back in, once you were in the UAE, you feel you don't fit there either. So it's like you're in the middle. So that's one of the reasons why even I wanted to move out, because I thought I didn't fit in both the places. It's a really weird feeling. Like, I think it's one of the major drawbacks of if you have lived in a foreign country that did not recognize you, or you don't get naturalized even after a ridiculously long amount of time. Like, there are some people who have lived for 40 years, and yeah, they're still people from other country. It can be Indian, Pakistani, or Egyptian, or Jordanian, like that, I guess. So Zaid, yeah.
no, I was just gonna say there's no discrimination against people not getting the passport.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. They say that they don't want to affect their culture, but their culture is already mixed. So it's like they eat other foods, they speak other languages, even the local people, right? Like, they start speaking Urdu, Hindi, like all the Arabs. So they marry from Indian and Pakistani. They do everything, but yeah, like,
I mean, it's
how
hard
the culture is not original anymore, right?
It's really hard to say that you're saving the culture when you are only holding like a very, very small percentage of the people there. And because if you were actually having naturalization, you could preserve the culture by causing these new people to assimilate into your culture. But instead, the few people who are in there are actually going outside of their own culture. So it's actually doing the exact opposite of what they say it should do.
Yeah. Something great about, I feel, like European countries is they have programs or whatever that can help like immigrants or like people who are refugees to become German or become Swedish. Like, they teach the language and there are classes to teach about the culture, which I think UAE could have done based on or any other country which is not doing naturalization could have done, because they have the funding for that, or they have the money for that. So yeah, let's move to the next question. So Zaid, how was your transition from school to university? So how did you go about choosing your university and your major, and what basically made you choose Renewable finally in the end?
So, going from school to university was a very interesting process for me, because throughout the last year of school, I've been like looking at many different options, many different universities, and more importantly, many different fields, you can say. And it was an interesting process because in the end, the one reason I found out about here it was is because we went to an open day just to eat in the buffet there.
Okay.
So
I did
So
that
we-
too.
see, because for us, when I thought about like a British university, in our thoughts, we were thinking like the price will be sky high, right?
Yeah.
So we went there because we were expecting as well something really nice in their open day. And because like, why not? It was a Friday and we were free. So we went there, and at that time we met with Dr. Senthil at that time, who has been like really helpful and told us about the program, about the university, and at that time about the price, which was a very big factor. Because in the end, like as much as you can say that things matter, for example, how good the university is or how not good it is, but price is a big important point, because you cannot go to a university you cannot afford. So in the end, we found out that it's something that we can afford, and it was very close to the end of the applications deadline. I applied to that university, and I've also applied to two other universities, to the American University of Sharjah and to the German University in Jordan. But in the end, I decided to go for Here It Was because of its education system, of how it's connected to the UK campus. So you're getting the same level of education, even in Dubai and in the UK. The transition was difficult at first because you find out that what you do in school does not work in university. The way of studying, the way of living, the fact that you have to depend on yourself more. So it was a pretty difficult transition at first, but after the first semester, you usually get used to it unless you don't want to.
And about your major, why did you choose electrical out of all the majors in engineering?
So I've had mostly, you can say, interest in programming, right? So initially, one of the fields I was thinking about going to was programming. But then I was thinking, so I have this interest in programming and some like small electronics. Why not just focus on the electronics? Because in the end, the biggest point or advantage of working electronics with the programming is that you can go into the more advanced fields which are popular right now, with like things like robotics, with artificial intelligence and all these fields. So I decided to go into electronics as a field that can complement programming, you can see.
And when did you find this interest in you? Like, was it closer to your high school, or did you have an interest for it since the beginning, or like how did you discover it?
I've had interest in programming for a long time, like since I was like a kid. And it was helped because my father did teach me how to program when I was like really young. I think I was like 8 or 9 years old when I wrote my first program. Of course, it wasn't really something you can really call a program, but it was my first step, you can say, in the field. And ever since then, it's been one of my interests and one of the things that I've always enjoyed. So I definitely wanted to go into a field that had something to do with programming at that point.
Interesting. And I don't know, like in your school, I don't know how was the class? Like, was it of mixed nationality? And how did you find people from your school to your university in your class actually? Like, was it easier to connect with them, or was it difficult?
So I wasn't often the kind of person who is the most social, you can say. You can almost say I'm an introvert of sorts sometimes. But you can say during school, we've had mostly different nationalities of Arabs.
Mm.
but we've had like a majority, I think almost, especially in high school, we've had like 95% of the students were Arabs from different locations, but they were all Arabs, which makes sense because the school is an Arabic school and they teach in Arabic, so you would expect everyone to speak Arabic anyway. Moving to here, it was kind of like a slight difference, to say the least, where I moved from a class which is full of Arabs to a class with me being the only Arab. Or I think we had one more person, but he left in the second year. So it was a surprise, but I really appreciated it because you really don't figure out things until you meet up people from different nationalities and different cultures. So it has been like a really nice experience.
It was the same thing with me. I studied with almost all the Indians, and then when I moved here, it was a mix, and I was always trying to get away from the Indians and interact with other people. And I'm glad my friend circle improved from first year to second year, and I'm happy.
Actually, like this, this transition between high school and university, it was very strange to me. Like for some reason, I knew that I was gonna be not like I was gonna have a different set of people from high school to university, and I expected it was gonna be Indians, because like looking at how many people or the population percentages in the JE, you get to know that at some point, like you're gonna have to, like normally normally when you're living there, you don't see, like if you're an Arab, you don't actually see the Indians, you don't meet with them. But once you actually go into like the work life and you start working, you're gonna see that almost everywhere, it's 60% Indians. So I expected that the university is gonna be the same. Um, so talking about like your last final year in university, was there something that you gained a lot from, or like something like that changed your perspective on what you are or what you want to do or what you were doing?
So during my last year, it was an interesting year for sure. Now, while I was working on like different things, like working on my final project, thesis, and I was also like working on trying to publish some papers with the professor. But at that same time, I was also trying to find what to do next because it was a kind of a big turnaround. Now, when I was in school, I had a very clear path because everyone almost nowadays is going to university, is going to bachelor's, and they will get their degrees and then they will see how to go from there. So I had a little bit of confusion. Do I just go and work? Do I just go and study outside? Do I just go and complete studies in here in the country? In the end, through like both the time I've spent in there as well as the time you can say I've improved, because at that time I've also like went to Malaysia with the university in order to give like a conference. And that was like kind of an enlightening experience about what is there outside from different countries and universities, because in there we've met many people from different universities, from Germany, from the US, from different countries. And watching their experiences was that point where I thought, maybe it's a good idea to see what is out there. So that is one of the things I feel that I've discovered during that last year.
And so this is before and after Germany. Were there any like countries that you considered other than Germany?
I've had my eyes on Singapore. I think it was the University of NUS, I believe, if that was its name, because that was also like a really nice university. And in Singapore, while it wasn't really free, it was still affordable enough to live and study in there. I've also taken a look at the UK. For me, the UK was kind of like an option that I would have liked, but it was a little bit out of my budget reach, but I had been considering it as a, just try to save up that money, try to get that amount and just to study there. And I think that's about it. I did take a look at some other countries like Switzerland, but then I immediately discovered that it's not going to work out due to one reason or another.
Yeah.
We know the reason.
We know the reason.
Yeah. So in all these countries, you were still trying to go into the same field, or did you have other fields in mind?
So I've been taking mostly a look into fields which are related to automation, because that's the thing I've been working on mostly, both in my thesis and both in my projects. And my secondary field has been in power and in renewable energy, because it's also one of my interests and, in my opinion, one of the most important fields that are going on right now to help save the environment. In the end, I ended up going for the power field because that's the best opportunity I found from the opportunities I looked for.
It's actually very interesting how everyone is going into different fields, but at the same time is thinking about saving the environment.
That's the thing, right? Even if a lot of places when you write a motivation letter also, if you somehow connect it to your sustainability and all this SDG, Sustainability Development Goals, your application stands out or not, I don't know, because even I kind of use that in my letter when I applied. It's just still showing that whatever job you're going to take up in future, you're still going to be thinking about the environment.
So what are you specializing in currently in power engineering? Is there a specific field that you want to pursue afterward?
So I'm mostly working in two main fields. The first one is, of course, renewable energy with solar panels and wind turbines, as we've spoke before. And the other one is about control and automation. Because I see that right now in every field, even in renewable, the best way to move the technology forward is to improve how to control what we already have. So when we already have systems, we already have hundreds of thousands of solar panels, of wind turbines, of different renewable energy systems. And replacing those is a big cost issue, because if you think about it, the biggest barrier to renewable energy is always the cost. Because if renewable energy was cheaper than conventional methods, then everyone will be using it. So the goal should not just be to make this really nice technology that can save the world, but also give the people the reason to use it.
One question of being interested in technology. So when you say cost, is it just the initial cost or is it a lifetime cost? Because I think the lifetime cost, the renewable, should be cheaper than the conventional, right? The initial cost for the renewable would be very high, at least for that. But the running cost and over a period of time, you should get more benefits from renewable, or no?
In many of the new, let's say, panels or new technologies, that is true. But then you face a small issue because there are many places, like the most ideal places for wind, for example, already have turbines in them. And there are older models which will generate some okay energy and they will eventually break even, right? But they really cannot afford to break them down and rebuild them because then they're losing their investment.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is one big issue that's stopping, especially you can see solar panels are not a big issue because there's sun almost everywhere. But for different technologies with wind, with sea power, you have more limitations on the locations. And even if you have many locations which are viable, there are the ideal locations were already taken by the initial technologies because the older technologies needed to use these highest or best locations in order for them to make any sense. So that's the big barrier sometimes between adding the new technologies into these old locations.
Abdul, does it ring any bell? We could put solar panels anywhere.
So, it's it's interesting. You can't put it everywhere, but I think at this point in like renewable in solar panel research, I think they have reached a point where the efficiency of a solar panel can reach up to 50%. And I know this is like currently in research, but like I don't know if it's sadly or I don't know, fortunately for us, in the next like 2 to 3 years, you're gonna find countries such as Singapore forcing forcing their people or like mandating a law that says each house needs to have a specific like amount of renewable energy coming from solar panels. So I think it is like going in a way where like we are just gonna have to go renewable. It's not gonna be a choice anymore.
Like I don't know, once, I don't know, me and Abdul had a discussion with one of the professors. So I told that why don't we just put solar panels on the sea, like on the seabed? Like, there are wind turbines which are kept in the seabed. Yeah. So, for example, a country like Singapore, it's already small, right? Yeah. So if people are going to have solar panels, it's just going to be in the houses. But what if you want to run the entire country on solar panels? And so putting this solar panels on the seabed is a viable option there because you can't use a lot of land over there. So the professor told, no, it's not, what you're saying, it's not possible or it's not feasible. And I think the 1 week later, we saw a video from China and we saw like solar panels on the middle of like nowhere. And we were like, so yeah. At that point we realized it's not an offense to professors, but professors don't know everything. I mean, they might be good with fundamentals and they might be good in the research. We were like, okay. So we were like, they are not all knowing. And that was an enlightening experience.
Actually, so this is an interesting topic. Zaid, where do you see renewable energy going? Is it gonna be like a global thing, like where they go in the middle of nowhere in the sea or Antarctica to like extract energy and send it to the other parts of the world, or is it gonna be localized, such as now?
The biggest issue that will face any way of globalizing energy is the fact that we are still in a very big, you can say, break point where we really cannot store or move really high amounts of energy effectively. We have some methods like storing them in like huge dams and hydro storages, but realistically we still have that issue where it's not just possible to reach that highest efficiency of reaching like 100% of renewable energy, except for very rare situations. Because, for example, when we talk about solar, it's only in the morning, which means that we need to store that huge amount of energy during the night. And for a house, for a building, that's fine. You can do batteries for that. But when you talk about an entire city, then the questions become bigger. And when you talk about something offshore, like, for example, offshore solar panels, it is possible, but again, the costs are so much higher. So in order for that to make sense, it's also pretty difficult. So I would hope that eventually we would reach a point where we can just like go to Antarctica and just generate power from there. But I don't see it as a possibility, as a realistic possibility, or at least as a majority. Like, I'm pretty sure someone somewhere will be like, how about we just try to do that? And they will actually do it.
Yeah.
But will it be a major source of power? Probably not.
Mm-hmm. This is reminding me more and more of some projects that Abdul worked on. Spending how much was that for the geothermal? He had to spend a ridiculous amount of money to generate a really small amount of power.
And see, the sad part, I don't know, maybe he had an idea of how it should have been done, but like he chose UAE as the country. I think like if you go to countries where like the difference in temperature between, like, such as Germany in the winters or Russia in the winters or even Antarctica, like the difference like in the ground is going to be too much from the surface, and that's going to generate more power.
Yep.
So what are your future goals, like after you finish your masters or even from now?
So when we talk about finishing masters, I'm almost in the same boat as I was during my bachelor's, where I'm in that point where I have no idea what's going on.
Okay.
I am considering like options, for example, working or finishing, continuing to do my PhD. But again, it all depends on what opportunities I can get. And it depends on how tired I am after finishing. Because as they say, I've been studying for way too long by now. Now,
Yeah.
I've been trying and find different, you can say, mini projects, not just in the field, but also some side projects that I wanted to work on or experience. I've been working on like right now I have a friend and we're working on some kind of startup. I'm also trying to work with my company and trying to be more of a part of what we can do, trying to expand the company because we're also a small startup in Germany. We have like 3 employees. And like 2 of us are part-time, so it's a little bit small.
Okay.
And in my free time, I'm also working on some stuff. For example, I've been writing a short, it's not a short, I've been writing like a novel that should have been out, but it's not. Delays. But yeah, that's more or less what that's been going on, you can say.
So you have been discovering your options and thinking about what you might want to do. What would you call the most ideal situation after you graduate?
Get money without working.
I mean, it would be ideal if I just won like $1 billion, then just didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, that's the ideal.
But realistically, you can say that I'd say that continuing PhD is a pretty good option, both from like you can say a future perspective, but it also gives me more of a chance to improve. So I think I would call that the ideal situation.
So how's your search for PhD going? Like, have you got in touch with any professor? Because I know PhDs work differently in Germany.
Not yet, because I still need to start my master thesis. So one option that I'm looking at is trying to do well enough in my master's thesis in order to actually continue PhD on the same topic or with the same professor maybe. If not, I'm going to be looking at different countries possibly, or different, you can say, cities in Germany. It's something that I still need to look more at, because right now I'm still too busy trying to sort out my master's in order to look for a PhD. So I'm just like waiting for now.
So do you have any tips or suggestions for people during the times of this pandemic, like what they can do to improve their skills or their chances of becoming a better person, or having a better life when they come out of the pandemic?
So the most important thing in my opinion is to just stay calm and have some kind of goal you're working on. So for me, when I was in the pandemic, I felt bad because I couldn't see my family, for example. Excuse me. And what I used that time for was both to improve my skills in terms of like learning, as well as finding a hobby that I can also make use of. And for me, that hobby was writing. For different people, they would have different things that they would do. But the most important thing is that they need to recognize that you now have some more time, unfortunately. Like, it's an unfortunate situation, but out of that mess, we now have that time which they can use. So the best thing is to just stay away from being idle, because not only will that mean that you wasted that time, but more importantly, you will feel bad about it. You'll just keep thinking about the pandemic, what is going on. Instead, just decide to use that time to to learn something or to invest in a hobby that you were thinking about, it's all about just using that time. So you don't really feel you're forced to stay because of the pandemic. You start to think that you're doing this and making use of this opportunity in the midst of this disaster.
So, one last thing before we conclude this interview. We just want the viewers or listeners to get to have an idea of what sort of field that the startup that you're working in is, and maybe you could talk also more about the book that you're writing.
So the startup right now is called EcoSoft, and we're doing some you can say some development for different applications which are related. Some are related to the environment, and we have been changing some stuff recently with the COVID times. Like, we are currently working on a different system in order to improve counting and detection for COVID, or mostly for like supermarkets, in order to minimize the number of people inside and to keep it within limits, while minimizing as well human contact. So you don't have to have like someone inside who's handing people some cards or some numbers. Instead, it's all done by artificial intelligence, where it will detect people and stop them when there are too many people inside. And we're also like looking at developing it to make it also try to do temperature scanning in order to make people who are likely to be sick know about it as an extra safety measure. So this is, like, you can say, the main project we've been working on in the last few days. Outside of that, we've been doing some projects with the Bavarian forest for different applications for monitoring for other purposes in there, and a few other smaller projects, but we're mostly focused on environmental projects, you can say. As for the book, I've been writing this fantasy novel. Unfortunately, it has been delayed until, I don't know, until it's done. And it's still like, right now, even the title has changed, so unfortunately I cannot really give a name for it. But if you at any time are interested with it, just search my name and you should find it. I think like there's only 3 people who write my family name the way I do it, so it should be pretty high up.
Maybe we can link it in the description book or something.
Yeah. So that's it for today, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the conversation we had with Zayd, and we hope you have learned from his experiences and his life. And if you guys want to get in touch with him, the links to his Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn are going to be listed down in the description and as well in the video. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.